Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Pattie and Pryma, and I'm an art therapist. And my business is called You Create. And I like this idea of You Create because it sets up a motto for me when I work with people using art therapy. And that is you can create new possibilities on your life journey. What I'd like to talk about today is something that I have struggled with probably my whole life, and that's procrastination. Today's class is designed using Heartwork journaling techniques to help me to explain procrastination. And if you're like me, a procrastinator of the highest level, you can hopefully learn how this works in our brains and how you can overcome it, moving from the primitive brain to the visionary brain. So I start with a thought download. So what a thought download is, so we're trying to overcome procrastination. And what a thought download is it's Heartwork journaling technique where you just simply sit with your paper and pen and you write whatever comes out, what comes to mind when you think about the topic. And for me, this was my procrastination thought download. So you want to think about how this topic makes you feel and what it brings up for you when you think of it. So for me, you can see here, when I think of procrastination, I think of, I don't have the confidence to do what it is that I think I should be doing. I worry too much about what other people are thinking. What if I fail? Another thing for me is that doing for others is more important than doing for myself. And then I go to the thought of, I failed before, so this won't be any different. So why bother? I've had so many losses in my life, and I know that I avoid trying new things for fear that it's just going to end up with another loss. Um, I tend not to value my achievements. The other thing is, I have to work to make money to pay off my bills. So I really tend to put anything that has to do with self-care out of my mind, and it goes on the procrastination list. And the other thing is that, I put things off till the end of the day. And then I think, I've done so much today. Uh, I really need to just take a break. And for me, that means sitting in front of the TV, scrolling on my phone, or having a nap. That's one of my favorite things to do. I also, I have a hard time admitting my weaknesses, so it's easier to do nothing than try. And I say to myself a lot, well, no one really cares anyway, so, why bother? I also go to the place that things I create are pointless and worthless. I go back to my childhood, and I think that I've created some craft or something, and my mother, she would look at it and she would just kind of point out all the things that I did wrong. And I'm left feeling very, very unworthy. So that's the feeling that I'm left with, just this big feeling of unworthiness. You might think that procrastination is just a bad habit, but actually, it's not just a habit. It's actually a clash between two parts of our brains. The limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. So I'll start by talking about the limbic system, and that's kind of rooted in our amygdala. And the limbic system is really the emotional driver. It's the brain's emotional hub, and that's where we process pleasure, pain, and rewards. So when faced with an unpleasant or challenging task, the limbic system seeks to avoid discomfort. And the role of the amygdala is within the limbic system, it processes our emotions like fear and anxiety. We can kind of look at this as the primitive part of our brain. This is where the fight or flight or freeze impulse comes from. When a task triggers overwhelming feelings, the amygdala activates and it really starts steering you toward immediate relief. And that could be running away from a bear, fighting a bully, or freezing. And freezing you can really think of as the response to something like stalling. It's a temporary pause for our brain. And that's when we can end up doing things like scrolling social media, maybe binge watching a TV series, or my favorite, taking a nap. And then we have the dopamine response that comes from this instant gratification. And that's the brain's reward system. And that can fuel procrastination, unfortunately, because we start engaging in a more enjoyable or immediate activity that releases the dopamine. That's the feel-good chemical. And then it kind of reinforces the habit of avoiding the challenging tasks. Now, this is in direct opposition to our prefrontal cortex, which you can see right there at the very front of our brains. And this is the rational planning part of our brain. So this part of our brain developed after the primitive brain of the amygdala limbic system. And it's located at the front of the brain. And it's responsible for things like executive functioning. So it's responsible for our decision making, our planning, and impulse control. And it also helps us to prioritize our long-term goals over short-term gratifications. So when you procrastinate, the prefrontal cortex is just struggling to override the limbic system's emotional impulses. And so it becomes this tug of war between emotional avoidance and rational decision making. And so that's really what I understood to be at the heart of my procrastination. So what I'm showing you here is a little doodle that I did up to show us what the primitive brain is like and how it acts for us in our lives. So I drew a little picture of myself in the middle of this triad, and it shows me in primitive kind of dress, the bone in my hair. And this shows us kind of the three aspects of our primitive brain. So the first aspect that I'd like to talk to you about is that idea of being efficient. So at our core of our amygdala in the primitive brain, our emotions are coming out and telling us we need to be efficient, which is really, we need to conserve energy. So for me, that's sitting in bed, laying in bed. I'll do it tomorrow. The second thing that is part of our primitive brain is the instigation of avoiding pain. And So that's where I just drew this little picture of a cave. I'm just going to stay in my cave. And that's where I'll be safe. I can avoid pain. And that leads to procrastination, which is really all those obstacles that come in our way of trying to um, achieve our goals from the primitive brain perspective. And then thirdly, there's a part of us that just seeks pleasure. Gimme, gimme, gimme. And often that's false pleasures that we feed ourselves with, things like overeating, which is a big thing that I do. Overworking, I can fall into that too, over drinking. So we begin to learn that our our primitive brain isn't necessarily working in our best interests. And it leads us into this vicious cycle of procrastination. So that task avoidance, I'll do it tomorrow, just avoid it at all costs. Then the deadlines are approaching, and this is me as my deadlines approach, whether it's work, things that I must do, or a big thing that I procrastinate is my housework. I'm a terrible housekeeper, and I will avoid doing housework until I have maybe someone coming over for dinner. And I've actually gone to the extremes of inviting people over to force me into that deadline of having to clean my house. But as the deadline's approaching, it just causes more stress. And then we have the pressure to perform. And that's when, you're rushing to complete a task, rushing around trying to clean my house before my friends actually come over for a visit. But what I didn't realize is that chronic procrastination actually rewires our brains. So it gets us into this pattern of task avoidance, stressing out as the approaching deadline, rushing to complete. And this just goes round and round in the procrastination stress response. And this really strengthens our avoidance pathways while weakening the ability of our ability to confront challenges head on. So this is where I'm left, feeling stressed out about the fact that I procrastinate so much. And I realized that I was really relying on my primitive brain to function in the world when that's really not my only option. There is another option because I have learned that we have a visionary brain. And this is what helps us to actually get out of the cave and to counteract those pathways that the primitive brain has set into motion. So we can do this in another triad, and this is the visionary brain triad. So the first part of the visionary brain is to generate energy. And this comes from our frontal cortex, that part of our thinking brain that is telling us, we could do things differently. So think new things, practice new thoughts, get out of that cave. And something that I really need to remind myself of is to be kind to myself as I am trying these new things and new thoughts. And actually encouraging myself to feel new emotions about my potential procrastination. The other thing that our visionary brain helps us to do is to accept and embrace the pain. So in our primitive brain, it's saying, avoid pain at all costs. But we can see when we move to our visionary brain, that frontal cortex, that we can begin to accept and embrace the pain. And often this is emotional pain, as it is for me. And so we can look to reframing the tasks of our goals. And instead of looking at the obstacles as a stop sign, we can look at them as a potential for growth. The other thing that the visionary brain helps us with is to delay pleasure. So instead of going to those automatic things that will give us that temporary pleasure, like mindless TV watching or scrolling or napping, we can learn to delay our pleasure. So to learn how to delay that gratification. So it's really, as you can see in my little doodle here, I drew myself looking into the future of what I want to create. And just thinking about, do I want it now? Or do I want to think about how can I go for it, in the future where I can start beginning to plan for that that goal that I know I can achieve. So we're really learning with the visionary brain to combat our primitive brain by being kind to ourselves. And that involves, looking at our self-criticism, which you saw that came out in my thought download and thinking about procrastination. I didn't have too many good things to say about myself. And those self-criticisms can just exacerbate our stress. But with self-compassion, we can promote emotional resilience and encourage our own progress. So by being kind to myself, I was able to realize that I'm not really worthless. I've done many things in my life that are worthwhile. And then that gives me the vision to be able to look to the future. I've really worked on embracing the pain of my losses. I've had a lot of losses in life, and I won't go into all the details here now, but those losses I just began to see as failures. And that really was a lot of emotional pain that I was carrying around with me. But when I look at it now, I'm able to see that I can grow from my past pain and losses. And I don't have to just live in the past, what I was doing before, just looking at all the negatives and just staying in that negative mindset. But now I can look at, yeah, I've had some losses, I've had some failures, but what can I learn from those things that I can take forward into my life and really help to reframe my thinking? So instead of thinking, oh, this is too hard, I'm not even going to try, maybe look at it as this is an opportunity to learn. And then I can put some positive associations into my thinking, which reduces the frontal cortex. No, sorry, it reduces the limbic system, and it helps to reinforce our frontal cortex. And then we can see that the primitive brain really has less influence on our vision. Delaying gratification. So I have to admit that procrastination initially feels good because I activate the brain's reward system by that dopamine release from, having that little, hit of ice cream, and that feels good, or, just scrolling through my Facebook and, seeing all the good things that are happening in other people's lives and how they're responding to my posts. Um, neuro Dopamine is a neurotransmitter and it's associated with pleasure and satisfaction. And it can be triggered by behaviors that do provide immediate gratification. So when you avoid a challenge or unpleasant task in favor of something more enjoyable, like watching TV, scrolling through social media, the brain experiences a short-term reward. And this can temporarily reduce our stress and discomfort in the moment. But when we shift our focus to that delayed gratification, we can choose actions that bring long-term rewards over instant pleasure. And in that, I'm developing a new skill which strengthens my prefrontal cortex. So just as when we are in that loop of the primitive brain, in that triad, and that reinforces the patterns in our brain. If we change that to the visionary brain, where we are generating energy, accepting our potential pain and reframing tasks and delaying that gratification, that's the brain loop that is going to be reinforced over and over again. So you can see, by engaging our visionary brain, you really do have everything you need to create your own story and conquer that procrastination. Engaging that visionary brain and reinforcing those positive reinforcements in our brain. So I've been able to do this, and really, it's really helped my own procrastination and really given me new ways to reframe my thinking. And I can actually enjoy cleaning the house now. And I don't have to leave it till the last minute when I've got people coming over, because I I know now that I'm doing it for myself, that I'm actually a worthwhile human being, and I can enjoy a nice clean environment. And that's actually helped me to become more visionary. And when my environment is organized, I find that it helps my brain to be more organized, and it really allows my creative brain to kick in, which really helps with art therapy. If you'd like help with your own brain download and working through how to enable your own visionary brain, I'd be happy to help you. Send me an email and we can organize some one-on-one time. My email address is right here, and just reinforcing you really do have everything you need to create your own life story in whichever way you want. So I look forward to hearing from you. Bye for now.